You love me so much more than I could ever know. Your love is deeper than this world will ever show. And all of life's beauty shines around this moment now. The sky and the cliffs, they seem to change my life somehow. And I will never be the same, will never be the same. Whoa, I will never be the same, never be the same ever again. Well, here I am waiting, Lord, my life is just for you. Please unfold all the plans that you would have me do. And if all the world's just a breath and nothing's here to stay, then all of the love we feel will save us anyway. And I will never be the same, will never be the same. Whoa, I will never be the same, will never be the same ever again.
And the epitaph on Judas's grave is recorded in Scripture. Better he had never been born. I want to say this to all of us, and I'm including myself. You know, I've always been a simple preacher, and it's because I don't look for these high-flown polysyllabic words to describe our condition. They're simple. And God's will is simple. The most wretched man in hell will not be Adolf Hitler. The most wretched man in hell, or woman, will not be one like Joe Stalin or some of these more modern devils. The most wretched person in hell will be a former Seventh-day Adventist.
Hello and welcome to SDA and this is season 16, episode 12. I think we're reaching our over 500 interviews of the last 5 years, and someone said to me the other day, when are you going to slow down and stop? I can't help it. We do 2 or 3 shows a week, and the information and the content, it just keeps coming up. And special guests like I have today, Dr. Keith Burton. Great to have you on the show. Guests like yourself, ensure the show keeps on going. How are you?
I'm doing okay, Peter. It's great to be on here, and feel free just to call me Keith.
Thank you. I appreciate
That's what my
that.
mother called me.
Yes. In season 2, I interviewed a lot of people on the topic of Glacier View and Dr. Des Ford. And so I had the pleasure of interviewing a lot of people that had their doctorates, and they would all say the same, so they were very, even though they had achieved all these things academically and as scholars, they were very much saying, hey, just, call me George or call me whatever. And it was fascinating to be front row and center, interviewing people like George Knight and Des Ford himself,
Yes.
Larry Geraghty, Fritz Guy, Denny 14, just a bunch of these guys. And so I learned a lot about Glacier View in that season. We did 86 programs in season 2. Now,
Wow.
I've noticed you commenting. I'm not sure if it's in SDA&A or Voice, SDA People's Voice. I'm not too sure which of the 2 groups, but I've seen you commenting in there. And recently you made a comment about. I'll read out. This is the abbreviated title. Oh, hang on, I have to bring it up. It's not where I thought it was. Give me a moment. So we've called the title "The White Lie: Eurocentric Hegemony in the Global Adventist Church."
Yes.
And you made a comment on one of our groups there, and said that probably you guys wouldn't be interested in in hearing about that. And I thought, oh, no, Keith, you're wrong. I am the guy. This is the show. We welcome such a diverse bunch of ideas and people presenting ideas. We had Ron Kelly not that long ago. I've had people that are very much the Pillars, Ellen White, traditional Adventist, Ted Wilson supporters, to the aforementioned progressive liberal Adventists, the academics and scholars. So I think we pride ourselves here in the audience as well as being a bunch of people that like to have robust conversations, but listen to diverse ideas and ultimately to find common ground. I think that's the thread that runs through everything I do anyway. I want us to find common ground so we can still find friendship and ways to move forward that better not only this community, but human communities. So thank you for saying yes, and thank you for the things you've said, and thank you for being part of the program. To start with, those that may not know who you are, I just want you to share a little bit about where you've come from. Are you an Adventist? Have you always been an Adventist? Right up to what you do now, and then we'll get into that title.
Well, yeah. So, a son of England. I was born in South London. My parents are from Jamaica, and from the Croydon Church. And some may know my baby brother, Ken Burton, from the London Adventist Chorale, and a number of other things he has to his name. And my parents were Adventist. In my teenage years, Adventism wasn't that exciting to me, and a lot of that had to do with identity. Growing up as a minority in England was not easy at all. Suffered a whole lot of racism. in school, police, society, everything. And so in my teenage years, I was more attracted to Rastafarianism. And when my parents thought I was sleeping in bed Friday night for church, I was at some club somewhere, getting my spiritual fix. And I
From
don't
the
say that.
Reverend Bob Marley.
Yeah, I mean, and I don't say that lightly, Peter, because it dawned on me a couple of years ago that I was really getting my spiritual cup filled. So listening to sort of that cultural reggae music,
Yeah.
speaking about themes of Black empowerment, etc., was really filling my spiritual cup, a cup that was not being filled in the Seventh-day Adventist Church, which was very Anglican,
Yeah.
wasn't really hard, and so that was my teenage experience. But then I had sort of a dramatic experience actually on my way home from a party. Actually, had a little bit too much alcohol in my veins and got in a car accident, but miraculously was able to walk out with just a scratch. For the first time in my life, I put in a seatbelt because those were the days we didn't have to wear a seatbelt.
No.
And I believe that was the Holy Spirit prompting me at that time. And that was the event that I kind of saw as my conversion in a sense, when I said, okay, let me start taking life a little bit seriously. I started taking church more seriously at that time and felt a call to ministry, which was very strange. That's a whole story in of itself because I'm the least likely of my parents' children to be a pastor. But I felt the call to ministry and ended up at Oakwood College. And I went to Oakwood thinking that once I finished, I'll go back to England and possibly, get a job as a pastor somewhere. But while at Oakwood, I actually got a second chance in life. And what I mean by that, in England, of course, those were the days I finished high school, I think 78 or 79. And, did terrible with my O levels. For those who know that system, I, you know, in an American sense, I was a high school dropout, And so when I went to college, it was my second chance. And I was very, very, very surprised to find that I was doing well in pretty much every class. And so by the time I finished Oakwood College, I had the highest grade in the school, actually, and realized that I could do this. I was an academic and I didn't know that. And so I had a call to pastor in California, but I also had an opportunity for a scholarship to do my graduate studies in Chicago. So I went to Garrett Seminary, Methodist Seminary, for my master's degree. It was on the campus of Northwestern University, and that's where I did my PhD in New Testament interpretation and classical rhetorical theory. And so that's my narrow area in terms of my research. After graduating, went to Oakwood, and I taught at Oakwood for many, many years. And while at Oakwood, I served in the General Conference Biblical Research Institute Committee and the Geoscience Committee. Was out of Oakwood for a while, and then when I came back as the founder and director for the Center of Adventist Muslim Relations. Also asked to write a Sabbath School Quarterly. So I did the 2014 Sabbath School Quarterly on Christ and the Law. Most recently, and of course I'm abridging a whole bunch of stuff, but most recently I've been at Advent Health University, where I direct the graduate program in spiritual care. And that's for people going into chaplaincy. So the long and the short of it, that's kind of my bio. Published a few books, a couple in the area of New Testament studies. Got a couple books on Jesus, the companion book to the Sabbath School Quarter for 2014. Also one published by Stanford Press back in 2004, The Compassion of the Christ. Also have an InterVarsity book that's Blessing of Africa, the Bible and African Christianity. Done some work with Erdman's co-editor, etc. So, and do a lot of things on cultural studies, particularly Black cultural studies. And what really piqued my attention, Peter, because I try not to engage a lot on Facebook, so I'm a lot less engaged than I used to be, because I find myself sometimes, I don't like to tussle anymore. When I was younger,
Yeah.
I don't like the tussle anymore. And you and I, that's kind of how we got to meet, because it got a little hot, and then we had the private conversation, and we kind of kissed and made up, So, so, so when I saw Ryan Day was on, and he was speaking about how whites, how the membership of the church is going down, and that's what piqued me, because I'm saying, well, the white membership is going down, but that's not all of Adventism, and being Black History Month and all, I thought, wow, we kind of need to still talk about this.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
That's a great, brief synopsis, I guess, of your background. And you mentioned it's interesting, like every day I'll be tussling with someone online. In fact, someone just came on that's just literally watching now, that we've been having a big tussle the last couple of days. And I really appreciated that you continued the conversation, and I think we, realized that it's the discussion that's important. And I don't think we were still civil. We weren't being there was no ad hominem attacks being thrown at each other,
and no sabers,
no sabers coming out. And when you said at that moment, but you probably wouldn't want to hear this stuff, you wouldn't want to give it the light of the day. That's when I said, you've got to come on the show. And I was so pleased that you said, yeah, I'll do it. Because these problems are nuanced, and care needs to be taken around the discussion, because polarization is only going to cause civil war of some kind. And the Adventist Church already, is very divided. You'd understand very well the divisions that have reared their ugly heads. 1888, 1919 Bible Conference, so tumultuous that both sides of the divide were happy to hide the papers, the minutes, until the 70s, And then, of course, we had questions on doctrine coming out in 1957, and that split the church in two. In fact, I think that the split that occurred then is still very visible today. And of course, you've got other categories and subsets and different groups and a whole lot of things going on. But I think if we're serious, and I mentioned off air that, I started late in life, and I've got two gorgeous daughters, 12 and 13. I want them to grow up in a less polarized world. And not that I can change anything, but I can at least be a part of conversations that hope to restore, rejuvenate, reform, and bring about change, so that our children can actually move forward without hatred, without division, without racism, without bigotry. And I think it's actually rare for people to have these kind of discussions and not divulge into more and more opposing. Yes, exactly. Yeah. And so, today's title, and I loved when you sent it to me, The White Lie, Eurocentric, Hegemony in the Global Adventist Church. I loved it on several levels, because I knew immediately people are going to associate Ellen White. They're going to associate the book, The White Lie, Walter Ray. But if they read on and become more informed, they're going to find out, hang on, this is a deeper conversation. And so I want you to take over and share your thoughts on this, and be as blunt, as in your face as you want. I think, people need to hear this content as real as that can be, laid out as possible. And the last thing I'll say, that the intro there with C.D. Brooks, it's part of the intro, and I knew that you'd been to Oakwood, I knew for sure that you would have met him, heard him speak.
Yes, yes.
And I remember being very impressed with something he said years ago about, at some point, I think 1968, 69, he went to the General Conference headquarters. I don't know where it was at that point. And he noted that there was segregation in the cafe, that there was
Right.
an area for black people and an area for white people. And that's in
Yeah.
the late or mid 60s, might have been 64, I can't remember.
Right,
But
right.
that shocked me, because I thought, I knew that the black community had their own conferences or conference unions, and I'll get you to share a bit about that later too. So I knew there was already kind of an organized, networked separation, but I didn't realize it was based on that kind of discrimination that he would have faced. So when I play that clip, part of it's a bit of humor, part of it's, former Adventists can be seen as the devil. I've been called a spawn of Satan and a tool of Satan. So there is a bit of that humor in there too. But tell us, before you talk about today's title, tell us a little bit about C.D. Brooks and how you interpret what he said there, because he was speaking at Oakwood during that clip.
Yeah, so C.D. Brooks, one of the premier evangelists in the Seventh-day Adventist Church, speaker director of Breath of Life broadcast, and of course the current speaker director is Deborah Snell. C.D. Brooks had an interesting story from North Carolina, from the Deep South. Grew up in a very rustic setting, sort of hardy, make it happen person, and he had a way with presenting his understanding of the gospel. As I say, his understanding of the gospel, which was extremely persuasive. In fact, I can say he's my favorite preacher. And when I say that, I'm saying it from more of a rhetorical perspective. Didn't always agree with his theology, but from a rhetorical perspective. He had the black preaching style down pack. He was, his use of alliteration, his structure of the sermon, his ability to tell a story, his passion, he was the man when it came to that. Tend to be a little, and again, I don't like labels for myself, but definitely not, sort of an Ellen White buff in a sense, but that's where he was. So he was definitely there, and that was important for him to let that be known, particularly when he was speaking in sections such as Oakwood, as you see there, where he's speaking to Adventist pastors. You wouldn't find, of course, in his evangelistic sermon, but when he's speaking to pastors, always reminding us who we're supposed to be, in a sense. I also knew him personally, and as a preacher, again, he knew how to hold that congregation, how to hold that audience. And I got to know him actually later on in my ministry, when I was hanging more with some of the older guys in ministry and going out to eat, etc. And he was just a comedian. I mean, we just had a great time. I was first, when I heard him joking and stuff, I was like, wait, Brooks? But he was just a wonderful guy. But again, from a theological perspective, definitely sort of old school Adventist, very committed to Ellen White, and felt that deviation, from the testimonies was something that could be deadly, and so when he said what he said, he probably meant it, even though of course, one could question when he says in hell, because you look at Adventist theology sort of thing. But but even that in itself is sort of part of his ability to say things. But of course, he doesn't have this sort of eternal, Dante's Inferno that.
And his audience would have known that too.
Right, he doesn't have that. But the way in which he said it, someone in the audience would probably think, "Oh my goodness, if I don't get right,
Yeah, yeah,
I'm going to be in that third circle of hell or something." So
yes, it
yes,
still carried weight. It's
right,
interesting. He, I think, passed away 2016 from memory,
Mhm.
which was the
Yeah.
year SDA&A started,
Mm.
and I think I left that year as well. Yeah.
Mhm.
So SDA&A had been going a little bit beforehand while I was still an Adventist.
Ah,
And my interest, I guess, when I first started SDA&A was to provide a platform for artists and creatives. So people like
uh-huh,
your brother, because I
uh-huh.
felt that the church was good at creating a sense of history for their pastors and their academics and scholars. But you'd mention a well-known musician of my younger years, and the young people of today wouldn't even know who it was. Whereas here we
Mhm.
are still talking about C.D. Brooks, and he will be
Right.
remembered. Des Ford will be remembered. These
Yes.
guys will be remembered, but creatives weren't. So that was
Mm.
the original plan of SDA&A, to interview artists and whatnot. But when lockdown hit, someone said, "Can you interview Bill Johnson?" And because I'd done a couple of interviews with Des
Yes.
Ford, and they said we'd be interested in what he has to say. And this was a young Filipino guy studying to be a SDA pastor and living in the Philippines. And he is now a pastor, and he watches the show still. And I said to him, "No, I'm kind of winding down. I've left the church now. Season 1, that's it. I've done my interviews, and it didn't kind of really take off. And my goal of promoting creatives have kind of been sidetracked into Des Ford and other things." And anyway, he contacted me a few weeks later and said, "I've organized and set up a meeting with you and Dr. Bill Johnson." So I thought, "Oh,
Mhm.
okay." So that was the start, the seed of season 2. And as I was doing that interview, and we only had about 200 members at the time, a very tiny little group, I could see the love hearts going up, and the interest in the conversation. And I
Yes.
thought, maybe this does have legs after all. And here we are 6 years later,
Hey,
um,
hey.
still doing these programs. But Des Ford was the first 3 interviews. And this is a long way around of me saying that he also was very good at rhetoric. And you may not agree with everything he said, but
Mm.
I'm not sure. I'm sure you are familiar with his famous
Yes,
forum
yes.
meeting, October 27,
Mhm.
1979. It's like
Mhm.
1 hour of this incredible delivery and incredible content. And he and C.D. Brooks were kind of very similar in their skill, their rhetoric, their
Mhm. Mhm.
appeal, their charisma, and their ability to convey ideas very powerfully. But two quite opposite sides of the fence there.
Right.
Um,
Yes.
yeah,
Yes. Uh-huh.
so as you can see, this is more of a conversation than an interview. People
No,
always
that's
tell me I talk too much, but it's a good way of just filling out the history, letting people understand what's going on, what the context is. So now I
yeah.
will sit back and listen, and I would love you to share any more thoughts you have, but then let's dig into the topic, the white lie,
Mhm.
Eurocentric
Yes.
hegemony in
Yes.
the global Adventist church.
Mhm. Yeah, because Peter, even as you started with C.D. Brooks, right? And we spoke a little bit about sort of the background of the theological development in St. Edmund's Church, 1888. We spoke about 1919, and of course, QED, etc., in the 50s. And I think all of that is kind of tied together. I presented at the annual conference at Oakwood this year, the Pastoral Evangelism Leadership Conference, in a session of the Association of Black Adventist Religion Scholars, and our theme was Black Adventist epistemology. How do we know what we know? And my paper was basically titled, If I Were at the Table. If I were at the table. I mean, I had a technical title for it, but it was mostly ministers. So I just said, okay, let me, because I think, I can't remember what the technical title was. I think was it apocalyptic critique of evidence, whatever it was. But anyway, if I were at the table, because
Yeah,
when you
interesting.
look at the formation, Peter, of Adventist theology, those who were at the table post 1844, say, right? So 1863, things going together. Okay, no one who looked like me was at the table. In 1872, when James White and was it Loughborough Smith, I forget who did it with him, put the first 22 propositions out there, which, by the way, they prefaced with the words, "This is not to secure uniformity." Okay, people like talk about historic Adventism. That's historic Adventism. Everyone doesn't sing from the same page, right? And so, but no one looking like me was at the table. The 1888 conference, Minneapolis, no one looking like me was at the table. And someone would probably say, it's no one looking like I know. But anyway, I wasn't at the table, right? 1919, I definitely was not at the table. I was definitely at the table. And 1919 was the conference that charted the path for Adventism. And a lot of the issues that we see now, particularly final generation, sort of the M.L. Andreessen stamp, and even the type of preaching that captured the imagination of a C.D. Brooks, grew out of that 1919, that cultification of Ellen White, the elevation of her to the status of scripture, that came out of that. So I think even as we introduced this segment with C.D. Brooks, very, very appropriate, because it does indeed portray the extent of European hegemony in the Adventist Church. And so what I'm looking at as a Black person and being an Adventist is the way in which whiteness, and when I talk about whiteness, let me be clear here, we're not talking about white people. Whiteness is used synonymously with the concept of white supremacy, right? And just because you're white doesn't make you a white supremacist. Now, if someone hears me talking about whiteness and white privilege, etc., and gets offended, then I think that person needs to say, could I be a white supremacist, or could I just be experiencing some cognitive dissonance, etc.? But whiteness is not the same as white supremacy, and even the concept of whiteness, which was invented during slavery around the 17th century, it's a club to which people are invited. And so Daniel Okrent, for instance, in his bestseller, The Guarded Gate, speaks of the way in which that term is used in the United States of America. So there was a time in the early 1900s, for instance, where if you were Italian, you were not white. If you were Irish, you were not white. If you were Jewish, you were not white. Oh, but it's a club to which you're invited. What's interesting, following the Mexican-American War, 1848, part of the treaty, and that was signed, the Treaty of Guadalupe, I forget the other word, but that part of that treaty was that the people who were being absorbed into the United States of America from Mexico, because of course, before the Mexican-American War, California, Arizona, Colorado, and a number of other places were a part of Mexico, right? And so because there were these racialized laws, all Mexicans were white. Okay, that's how they were classified. They were white. The same is true. There was a case in 1920 where there was a Syrian who took his case to the Supreme Court. And to this day, if you're from the Middle East in the United States of America, you are white. If you're from Egypt, you are white. Okay, so whiteness is a club. It's a club. And the whole idea of white supremacy is that membership in this club gives you privilege. Now, how it relates to Adventism is that there is a sense in Adventism that there is a neutrality when it comes to religious expression, when it comes to theological doctrines being formulated. And, we don't necessarily see that white stamp in there. And so folk can look at the church manual, and I know in the 2010 version of the church manual, for instance, page 144, you're going to see a little statement that talks about music, that Christians should not listen to jazz or rock in hybrid form, and I'm like, okay, what is this? When I look at the church hymnal, and you're looking, most people, they just sing the songs, right? So they're not looking at the meter, and they're not looking at the tune, etc. Bach, Beethoven, Mozart, Chopin, Gallic folk tune, Norwegian folk tune, Netherlands folk tune. So we're seeing all this in there, and this must be neutral. I've been to many places around the world, many Adventist places around the world, and I hear people say, "Oh, one good thing about being Adventist, wherever we go, we sing from the same hymnal." Is that a good thing? These are hymns written in Europe, for goodness sake, And so we're looking at this again, this neutrality, this sense of neutrality, when really it is this notion of white supremacy, which is supposed to be invisible, and we're being forced to accept it as neutral. And so we can talk about the largest growing segment in the church being in the continent of Africa, with 3 divisions and, over half of the population, etc. But I remember the first time I went to Valley View University in Ghana, and the first thing I faced was a huge picture of a white Jesus, a huge mural of a white Jesus going in. I'm like, how in the world are we going to white Jesus on the African continent? And when I spoke about it, someone asked me if I was a racist, because I said, you need a black picture of Jesus, right? Okay, and so it's so embedded that folk don't realize the depths at which many of us have succumbed to a mental slavery, where we would defend the very psychological damage that has caused us trauma. And when I presented a paper at the Adventist Society of Religious Studies last year on this whole theme of trauma. It was Living While Black: Toxic Triggers and Adventist Trauma, looking at the reality that to be an Adventist is to really experience, and not just an Adventist, to be a Christian, is to experience what William Du Bois refers to as a double consciousness, right? So in his Souls of Black. And so he speaks about, we have to sort of navigate this line where we're told to deny our own identity so that we can fit in.
Yeah.
And it's something that, I have not been silent about this, even I know when I was on GC committees and things were happening, and I heard some things and my hand was raised, folk were like, probably, oh, here goes Burton again, because I mean, and I would tell, and I hope I'm not jumping around too much, but I remember a few years ago, I was a Fulbright scholar, Fulbright Hayes scholar, with a group over in Senegal. And we were studying, Muslim communities, and the whole interfaith cooperation in Senegal. And I remember making a report to a group from the North American division when I came back. And I said, if you see any videos on YouTube of someone who looks like me in a village dancing with some of the villagers, I paused and I said, it's me.
Yeah.
And yeah, because I'm like, why am I, that's part of my culture. I dance, all right? At the family weddings, when the party comes up, I'm getting up. I'm not, because that's me.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna let this church or anybody.
Yeah.
And, I'm an ordained pastor in the church.
Yeah. Yeah.
I wrote one of the commentaries that's coming out in this series, right? I did the comments on Philippians. But again, looking at this whole Eurocentric hegemony, okay, I may choose to be a member in the Seventh-day Adventist Church, but I refuse to lose my identity. And the unfortunate thing, the church often does it. Let me say this one last thing, because I could see you got a question in your mind, right?
You can see it coming out.
Yeah. So let me say this is one last thing. When I wrote the Sabbath School Quarterly, published in 2014, I knew we were dealing with Jesus. And, you know, I guess we could talk some more, if it's necessary, on the reason why this is such a passionate topic for me. But I know the power of images, right? And I know as a pastor, you know, my children coming to the church and the resources that were given to them in kindergarten for that, you know, all white folk in the church, all white folk in the Bible, right? And so it's like a country club, no blacks allowed sort of thing. The Sabbath School Quarterly is all white, all white, all white. And so when I did the Sabbath School Quarterly, I said, I know it's on Jesus. So I asked the folk, I said, listen, it's about Jesus. I didn't ask them to put like a black Jesus or an Indian Jesus or an obscure Jesus. I just said, please don't put any image of Jesus on there. What they do? White Jesus, right? Like, forget it, dude. And the reason why I'm so passionate at this point is when the last Sabbath School Quarterly came out, the one now with Philippians and Colossians, absolutely tone deaf. They don't care. They don't care. General conference sessions.
Interesting.
I mean, your band couldn't play there. Why? Because you got drums and bass guitar and a little bit of rhythm. Couldn't play there. That's wrong. That's wrong. That's wrong. That's seated in racism and this whole notion of white supremacist normalcy.
Right.
And you know, again, this is not the first time I'm talking out about this, but I'm definitely not going to be quiet. So
good. I don't think anyone should be quiet on where they come from. I've changed so much in the last 5 years, having done hundreds of hours of interviews with people. I would hate for people to look back 5 years ago and go, oh, that's what he was about, when there's so many areas that I've changed because I refuse to shut up. And then I go, oh, actually, I was a bit wrong on that. I think we need to allow room for us to just keep speaking what's on our heart and to not be afraid of being ignorant and to therefore learn from it with these kind of civil conversations.
Yes.
When you were talking about getting up and having a dance, it reminded of me. I sang at the GC session in Toronto, Canada. I can't even remember what year that was. But before we went on stage, it was just me and two other women. There was a trio, the three of us. And before we went on stage, and it was a massive, I think it was, I don't know in meters, but it was 200 yards long, this stage.
I remember that,
and we were on, I think, a Tuesday or a Wednesday night, and there were like 70,000 people out there, and it felt like you were singing in front of a sports crowd because everyone was getting up and moving and talking. Anyway, my point is that they said to us, you are not, make sure you don't, they were very nice about it, but we don't want you swaying and moving, and we don't want you tapping your toes. So I thought, okay, no worries, did it. The group right after us were young, 9 to 16-year-old groups from some African division. Their whole presentation was dancing and singing and dancing, and everyone's in the audience loving it and clapping. And I thought, what are they? Where did that advice come from? It was very confusing. So you can relate to that.
Yeah, and I remember San Antonio General Conference.
Yeah.
And people were complaining because they said they got a black general conference, and because African Americans now, they basically just have their own concerts and stuff, right? And
I know.
And right, so folk can get up and move and do whatever they want to do. But it was Edwina Humphrey. She did the finale for that, and what song was it? I forget the name of the song. It'll probably come to me. But they actually allowed a backing track. And the backing track was syncopated and everything. And let me tell you something, Peter.
Yeah.
The whole place was up, hands raised, praising.
Yes, I love it.
And I'm like, listen, they're trying to control something, and the people want to worship.
Yes.
The people want to worship.
In alignment with their identity.
Exactly,
which
exactly,
goes
and
deeper than Adventist ideology.
right, and it wasn't just black folks standing up, it
Mhm.
was there were people who just wanted to worship, and I think this whole, um, quest to not only keep this is not even keeping the church in the 19th century. This is like going back to the probably the 15th century,
Yeah,
it's those people who make those decisions, you
yeah,
know, are totally unaware that they are behaving in this sort of um dictatorial
yeah,
um uh I can't even think of the adjectives right now,
yeah.
but they do not represent the people.
Yeah, and I guess this is what you're saying is that at a level of global Adventist leadership, this group of people that have this, can we call it a metaphor of whiteness,
Mhm,
um, that they expect the globe to kind of tow along. One of the insightful things I believe Ellen White gifted the church was her understanding, and we're going to get into some things that she said that you may not, that you know about. I would love your thoughts
mhm,
on. But
mhm,
a positive thing was the way she helped set up the unions, because she knew that people on the ground in whatever part of the world, the
yeah, yeah,
union could then go, hey, let's decide depending on the identity and culture of this, our people here. She
mhm,
saw that. And yet when we see these, particularly Antonio with women's ordination, that freedom to decide what was best for your subculture was essentially removed. Um,
mhm,
so they didn't really listen to her good advice there. Um,
mhm,
so many things are bursting into my head, and I'm loving this conversation. Thank you. Um,
mhm,
one time, my daughters, as I said, I started late, and they're only 12 and 13.
mhm,
When my eldest daughter was about 9 at the local Adventist primary school, one daughter is homeschooled with Montessori, and the other one goes to the Adventist school. She loves it. She loves her friends. I'm not criticizing the school at all,
mhm,
but they had a itinerant preacher come in and do the chapel one day, and she was only 9, and they were
mhm,
talking about this content, and they were
mhm,
using the word white, and they were
mhm,
speaking in a way that in her young mind, she couldn't differentiate any nuance that they had.
mhm,
I rang and spoke to the guy and realized he was coming from the same position that you
mhm,
are, but in
mhm,
her young mind, she couldn't see it. And so she
mhm,
came home very distressed that she was a white person. And
mhm,
and and honestly, it impacted her in a negative way. And there may be people from different communities that go, good, the chickens are coming home to roost, and what your ancestors, the white colonialists, did, they're just going to have to suffer now and pay for it. Whereas I
mhm.
think, the guy, what's his name, who wrote Amazing Grace, wasn't he an actual slave trader? And
Newton, yes, mhm,
Newton, and the grace that was offered to him, and I'm sure he took a while to understand the nuances of it all. But if we're in a community that has these specific, and I agree with you, terrible um, historical actions that are just disgusting, as those things shift, and people at the table that
mhm,
you weren't allowed at
mhm,
suddenly went, hang on, we do want people at the table that are from a diverse and multicultural background, and the very people who had made the table exclusive now began to change, like Newton, Amazing Grace. They saw their society that they'd been a part of implementing, they now wanted to be part of the solution. And so in my time of growing up, and again, this is where I might be ignorant. You
mhm,
call me out, please, if
mhm,
I'm wrong.
mhm,
My perspective, my naive, ignorant perspective is that I felt that my generation were working with all cultures against racism. We were working with women to bring about equality. What I'm noticing now is what my daughter picked up on is that while there might be a nuanced scholarly view of whiteness, when people present it to young minds, they're just polarizing. And instantly, you know, she was having discussions about, you know, her and I, you know, I see white fragility in the background. She's too young to understand those concepts, you know. She just started to feel bad about her whiteness. And I'm just seeing cracks that could swing the other way, where people, once power is gained and there is another table, some people at the table might say white people are not allowed here. They might not go white supremacists. They might have polarized and not understand the nuance and gone, no, white people are not allowed. How do we fathom and breach these issues so that restoration and reformation can continue in a way that allows everyone to be at the table? Because what I'm sensing in the world, not you, just globally, incredible polarization on all fronts on many, many topics. And I think, you know, for the sake of our children, we don't want to revisit any kind of attacking of people's identity. One last quick thing there. I was back to the music. I was singing at a church in Sydney, and they, on the night, we'd set up ready to go. It was called a bush dance over here. It's in America. It's I forget what they call it, but it's basically dance moves that are choreographed, and you know, you link your arms and
line dancing, right?
Like a line dancing thing, and you know, you go forward and you do and you link arms and you nod and bow and you go around in circles and hold hands and into the center and all that kind of stuff. And they were about to ban it like half an hour before the program, and I'm talking to the head elder, and I looked across at the notice board, and the week before they had a international night, and there were pictures of people from Thailand doing their dances, people from Samoa doing the slap dances. Every photo that had been on the poster was about dancing and sharing their culture. I said to the guy, I said, hey, look at that poster. Look at me. My culture is that Irish, Celtic, Scottish, that brand of music that has this kind of dancing as part of its culture. You're attacking my culture. And I was being a bit tongue in cheek because I didn't care. And he went, oh, I'm so sorry. I realize what I've done. And so the gig went ahead. But yeah, just please address some of those thoughts, as I am noticing people going, hey, we thought our skin is white and we were a part of the solution. We were naive, but it's the people at the table that initially caused, for example, with women, the inequality, who also then went, that's unfair. We've come from something that was really not. And this is where I'm naive. This is where I want you to correct me. But my naive, ignorant view is that white people also want to feel like we were part of that conversation, naive as it may have been, and there have been changes. How do we keep the conversation going without polarizing to where we're the bad guys, you're the good guys, and there's war again, and there's hatred, but now flipped around?
Yeah. Now I would say, Peter, that the war has never stopped. Right. The war has never stopped. Okay. And just take a look at the United States right now. Okay, the United States, we're seeing what I call not only the advance of the Confederacy, but the victory of the Confederacy. And so certain things were suppressed for a while. But if you think about it, I live in a town called Ocoee. I didn't know until we built our house here. Actually, I've lived there for 6 years. Didn't know until we built our house here that in 1920 they chased every black person out of town in Ocoee.
Wow.
Black folk didn't start moving back into Ocoee about what, 20 years ago.
Wow.
The mayor of Ocoee just gave an apology five years ago.
Wow.
5 years ago. After Mr. Trump was elected president, the day after, I had two overt, racist, and I wouldn't say confrontations, they were confrontations, but I did not respond. Okay, so I think we may think that we've come a long way, but no, not at all, not at all, not at all, not at all. And books like The Color of Law, for instance, when you see the impact, and again, I'm just looking from an African-American perspective, right? Looking at The Color of Law, Caste, the origin of our discontent, The Warmth of Other Suns, a number of works out there, just let you know, that things may seem as if they changed on paper,
right,
but they're very much the same. I am very aware that there are some places that I will not be invited to, even in the Seventh-day Adventist setting. The last time I spoke at Seventh-day Adventist Theological Seminary, I kind of knew it was going to be the last time I spoke there because I dealt with the whole notion of a seminary where if they're looking for a new professor, for instance, rather than look at some of the Black folk here who may have their terminal degrees, their PhDs, etc., they're going to go to Eastern Europe. Okay, they're gonna. They do that now, and you probably saw the Spectrum article about about something that took place recently, etc. Right? So I mean, it's not old. It's not old. It's new. It's something I live every day. It's something I live every day. So even in my close circle, the DEI office at Advent Health had to change its name. At our university had to change its name because of what's taking place. I live in Florida, where they're not allowed to teach certain things about Black history anymore, etc. Right?
Wow.
And so for a long time, you have little Black kids all the time who feel ostracized, who feel left out. And again, I'm not saying that the feeling that they have, everyone should be able to do that, or everyone should be able to experience what they're experiencing, etc. But I do feel that we need to do a better job at confronting the reality that a lot of the injustices aren't just a fact of history, they're a fact of the present. They're abiding in many ways. And a lot of times around the table too, I remember someone saying to me once, when I made a statement in protest of something that was happening, it was a GC committee I was on. And someone from the GC coming and saying, Keith, I think you need to keep quiet about some things because we have plans for you. Right. And so they had plans, I guess, to take me up to the GC somewhere. And I'm like, but I'm not going up there muted.
Yeah.
So I wasn't the guy for them, right? And so even when you see diversity in, phenotypical diversity around the table, it doesn't necessarily mean that there's ideological diversity.
Yeah.
And what I'm challenging the church with now is to start listening to the multiplicity of voices and not the voices that have been stamped. I remember I was asked to teach at Seleucia University in Zimbabwe. This was the first year when they decided that they were going to have an independent graduate program and not have the Andrews teachers come over there and teach.
Yeah.
So I, entertained the discussion. There was a discussion on polygamy. So I entertained the discussion, listened to the different perspectives of the pastors. Many of them at the time were my seniors, pastors and conference leaders. There were some who didn't think it was a bad thing and some who thought, totally. So I was told that, okay, now you've heard the different perspectives. Tell us what the right answer is. And I said, I'm not from your culture. I can't just come over and say this is what it is. And they said, well, the Andrews professors would tell us, well, no, that is not my
Mm,
responsibility.
mm.
So I actually had someone report me to the general conference because which to me is laughable in and of itself, because we are not an episcopacy, so
Yeah.
but unfortunately, because you see what's taking place in Kenya now, and some people are saying, well, we report to the general conference. That's not how our church works. But anyway, put all that to
Yeah.
the side.
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know the whole idea of people being used to being indoctrinated, which is very interesting, because folk who like to quote Ellen White um, don't quote things like, we must teach our youth to be thinkers and not mere reflectors of other people's thoughts.
Mm.
There are many things we have to learn and many, many more to unlearn. But instead, unfortunately, Adventist education, for the most part, particularly theological education, is teaching a lot of our clergy to be salespeople of a
Yes.
1919 version of Adventism.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. If the war is still going, this notion that when one speaks of white, they're speaking to a whiteness that more is aligned with the far right, and yet
Mhm.
for the content to trickle down to my daughter's age, to young people, to the average person in the street that may not be too au fait with all the nuances and the history and etc. Doesn't that also place the ignorant and naive white person who may not be white supremacist in
Mhm.
a culpable position?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, definitely, I don't disagree with you there at all, because that's the power of white supremacy, right? And none other than President L.B. Johnson, Lyndon B. Johnson, um, Bill Moyers. In fact, this was reported in a New York Times editorial some maybe 30 years ago. But Bill Moyers shared details from a conversation that he had with the late president when they were in Nashville. And by the way, Johnson used to use the N word very liberally, right?
Mm,
He was known for doing that, even though he was a champion in many ways for the civil rights. It was under him that the civil rights bill was passed, and the voting rights, etc. Right? But in talking about the power of white supremacy, he says the problem with a lot of poor white people is that they believed the lie that it's better to be white than anything else, and they allow those who come up with the myth of white supremacy to pick their pockets and say nothing. And so the myth of white supremacy is basically a tool by those who want a way to guard and amass wealth, and they're using the masses to protect. Remember, it comes from slavery.
mm, mm.
It comes from slavery. It comes from slavery, where you have those who are making immense amount of wealth from slavery, when the majority of whites did not have access to that kind of capital. And so, how do you stop another Bacon's rebellion? I'm not sure if you're familiar with Bacon's rebellion, that took place in the 1600s. Bacon was a white, actually, he actually had a plantation, down there, but he wanted to sort of overthrow the status quo. And so, whites and blacks got together in the 1600s, and they basically tried to overthrow the government,
Mm,
because the whole idea was we're poor together.
yeah.
And that's when you see this sort of white agenda being pushed through. And so the problem that we have is that a lot of folk who we refer to as white now are actually the victims of whiteness. victims of whiteness to a point where when we think about Barack Obama, for instance, in fact, I presented a paper and I said, the title of the paper, this was years ago when Obama was president. The title of my paper was, "Why is Obama the first Black president?" And I'm sure there were many people who were thinking about, oh, because it's the president. And everything. Well, the reason why he is the first Black president is because when people look at him, they only see his father, they never see his mother.
Mm.
Okay, so until we have a society that acknowledges the complexities of who we are as humans and embraces all those complexities, then these trite labels like Black and white, because the same people who invented whiteness invented Blackness. All right, I'm only Black because the people who invented whiteness said I'm Black. Okay, said that all the other things that pour into me, and even from an American perspective, right? Why used to say, "Oh, I'm Italian American," or "I'm Italian American," or "I'm Irish American," or Scottish American. Okay, and they say, "Well, you're an African American, right?" Okay, African's a doggone continent.
Yeah.
I mean, I can say I'm an African American. And even if I said, I can't even say I'm a Nigerian American, because who invented Nigeria? The British invented Nigeria. The British invented Ghana. They're the ones who drew the lines. Fortunately, through DNA, I know I'm Igbo, and I also have a little bit of Yoruba. I got a little bit of Akan, I got some Nguni. I know that, and even that. And we're still talking about this whole invention of whiteness and the insidious way in which it impacts identity generationally. I used to have people in England say, "Go back to your country." I'm like, wait a minute, I was born here, right? But say even if I said, okay, I'm going back to Africa, where in Africa?
Yeah.
At that time, I had no idea what my ethnic makeup was, right? And right now, even as you look at me, society says you see a Black guy, right? Society doesn't say you see an 89.5% Black guy, But you don't see that less than 1% Ashkenazi. You don't see my Scottish. You don't see my Irish. Okay, those make up. Listen. I got cousins. I got tons of cousins in Australia. All right, whose whiteness has been diluted, whose Blackness has been diluted over generations. Right? Went over with that ship that left Jamaica in the 1850s.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And some of my cousins from that ship went there to Australia. And them living in Melbourne and other areas. My relatives, and I could tell you exactly how we're related.
Yeah.
Through Nicholas Gross, which, by the way, through Nicholas Gross, I'm actually connected to King Charles. King Charles' 32nd grandfather is my 33rd great grandfather. Okay,
wow.
And with the peaceful. All right. So again, we're still talking about this whole notion of whiteness, and so whiteness is a social construct.
Yeah.
Right. That basically was used to unite for the sake of protecting those who are in the position of power. And because we buy into these labels and we forget the sort of traditional understanding of ethnicity from the Greek ethnos, meaning where you're from, right?
Yeah.
And this is where it gets a little more complicated, Peter, and tell me if I'm going too much in the weeds here, right?
No,
but this is where it gets more complicated. So we have a category here in the United States of America called Latino. Okay. And I'm like, so it's like, okay, so I'm a Latino. That's a language, for goodness sake. All right. And and it's basically mostly Spanish, but Portuguese, right? And so the Latinos now, that whole notion of Latino, it covers the descendants of the conquistadores, those who came and conquered. It covers the First Nations, the the Sioux, the Apache, the whole nine, right? It covers actually it even covers the descendants of enslaved people. I mean, it's just this whole thing. It just doesn't make sense to me. It doesn't
Yeah.
make sense. But then it does make sense, because even that in itself allows for this sort of racialized hierarchy, when people from Spain and southern Portugal and Italy, etc., were not considered to be white. And so
Yeah.
Latinos allows them to be excluded in a sense, right?
Right.
And so again, I would love it if we kind of had the language to educate a new generation.
Yeah,
That
I think that's what I was alluding to before.
yeah. Mhm.
Because could it be possible? So you mentioned that battle, Bacon, what was it?
Oh, Bacon's Rebellion.
Bacon's Rebellion,
Yes.
and people with white skin and people with darker skin and all shades of skin united together during this
Yeah.
ongoing war to try and
Yes.
make a significant impact on the control, the government.
Mhm.
So that means that people of all skin colors do pull together to fight this enemy.
Mhm.
I wonder if and please tell me where I'm wrong with stuff. I'm a babe in the woods on lots of things, but with the word white, and even the play on words for today's program, the white lie, a lot of people thought we were going to be talking about Walter Ray and the White Lie book. A lot of people think, oh, is this a black versus white people?
Mhm.
You've identified there's really a bigger view that's
Mhm.
whiteness and more to do with white supremacy.
Mhm.
By coupling the word white supremacy,
Mhm.
isn't it similar to calling a Latino that comes from so many different walks of historical, cultural backgrounds,
Mhm.
potentially for a young person who is Latino and isn't aware of the nuances, to therefore feel that they, if criticized, aren't separated into the conquistador background or the Mexican background or the Apache background, and they are lumped in it. My concern is that if white becomes so associated with whiteness and white supremacy,
Mhm.
white people
Uh-huh.
may start going, we have white skin, but we felt we were joining with you in this ongoing war. That you're
Right.
right. It probably hasn't actually. No, there's no winning in sight even, but
Uh-huh.
there is a sense of togetherness. Is there a better word than white to describe this white supremacy so that we can better not have people that are young and unsure of terminologies fall into a sense of, oh, I'm part of the problem. I'm white. I have white skin. I'm a bad person. Literally,
Yeah.
my daughter said to me, Dad, I have white skin. Am I a bad person?
Right. Yeah.
Because
And
she was 9 when she heard
yeah,
that.
yeah. So Peter, I think that's a point for you now to so that the onus is on you to kind of explain what whiteness is all about, right?
I I
So
I'm not making a claim though. So the person making the claim, it's
mhm.
their responsibility to provide the evidence to back the claim. I'm asking the
Right.
person making the claim that
Mhm, mhm,
Eurocentric hegemony in the global over the church is a
mhm,
thing.
mhm,
So,
mhm,
and I'm
mhm.
not saying it's not.
Right.
I tend to agree with you, but
Mhm,
I'm
mhm,
saying,
mhm,
okay, I'm the guy who
mhm,
potentially is labeled as part of the problem, a
mhm,
beneficiary of the
mhm,
wealth.
mhm,
Someone that though is not a white supremacist way downstream is privileged because of it.
mhm,
So someone like me who feels like wanting the world to be a better place, that's very naive, but it's definitely on my heart to bring my daughters, into a better
mhm,
world,
mhm,
and yours, you'd have that on your heart as well. So part of it is because I am in that situation, I am needing to talk to someone who is not only claiming what you're saying to be correct, I believe is correct. How do we have a better understanding of your claim, but also hold on to a sense of our identity as well, without being racist? So it's a genuine question to find out, what does a solution look like that doesn't just polarize black and white, so that one day when the general conference is fully taken over by black people at the table and white people may not find a place at the table, I don't think that's a solution either. I don't think a flipping of the model is because we both know, everyone knows that if you get power, no matter what color your skin is, you will then dominate, suppress, keep that power in not very kind, virtuous ways. And history has shown that when people of all skin colors gain power, they then move into positions of dominance that ensure that their supremacy prevails.
Yeah. So again, valid, very, very valid points. Yeah. I think what I'm doing is recognizing the issue, right? And our language is limited because the language has been co-opted and used for these nefarious purposes, right? And so I think one thing that a person can do is to deliberately choose to reject labels. Okay, so if, for instance, whiteness is being used as a foil for sense of superiority, for sense of privilege, et cetera, I think it's good to recognize it. And people like Tim Wise, Jane Elliott, and even D'Angelo in White Fragility is basically saying, listen, we need to recognize that this is a problem, that this is a problem. And I think that's there. But then, okay, so how then can we move forward, right?
Yes.
How can we move forward and say, what can we do to change the narrative? What can we do to change our circles, right? Because again, children are vulnerable, right? And what could happen? I'm glad that you have the type of relationship with your daughter that she could come home and tell you how she felt about it, because you now have an opportunity to do something, right?
Yes, yes.
Your daughter could have been that person, like, okay, that's who I am. I'm not supposed to like X, right?
Yeah.
And I remember my first overt experience with racism. I was in junior school in south of London, South Norwood Junior School. And my best friend, Paul Bassett, is my best friend, a white guy. His dad had a shop on the High Street on Portland Road. And it was on the corner. It had a flat roof. And Paul, invited me to play on the roof. And after school one day. So I went there after school. His dad was serving someone in the shop, went up the back stairs, and they're playing on the roof, having a good time. Good time. His father finished with the customer, came up to the roof, and chastised Paul. Why do you bring this N into our house? And I was a little kid. I was about 7, 8 years old at the time. And he picked me up and pulled me down the stairs and literally pushed me out the shop and threw the bag behind me. The next day, when Paul came to school, my best friend called me the N-word. Learned it from his dad. I punched him very, 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 very hard, and we never spoke after that. Haven't spoken to him since, right? And so I think parents have a lot to do with changing the narrative, because as far as Paul was concerned, his father told him, these are the lines, these are the barriers. And if you look at the history of this, like for instance, on the plantations, a number of the kids running around were the master's children, right?
Mm.
And there were a time when the master's children from the enslaved people and from the legal person would play together.
Mm.
But at a certain point, they weren't allowed to do that. Again, they're being taught. And so this whole thing of racism and division is something that's taught, And so how can we reteach? How can we rewire? How can we say, okay, recognize that because of your skin color, you may be advantaged or disadvantaged, etc. But it doesn't mean that you're better. So I don't think it's necessarily saying, okay, I'm white and so and so, because to use white in the way in which the white supremacists intend for it is dangerous. It's dangerous. So James Cone, I familiar with James Cone. James
Yes.
Cone is right, the father of black theology. So in his black theology and black power and his black theology of
Yeah.
liberation, what
I
he
was
does, of
reading
course,
some
he says,
yesterday.
yeah, so he says God is black, right? And so, but he's not saying that God is from Africa. He's like God is black, and then he invites white people into blackness.
Mm.
Okay, so he says, if you want to be liberated, come into blackness. And it's kind of like Martin Luther King, when after he wrote his letter from the Birmingham jail, developed into, why we can't wait. Because there were some of his supporters, and we know with the civil rights struggle, all right, there were white folk who died, Viola Louisa, Chaina, there were white folk who died fighting for the rights of blacks, right? And so we do know there have always been white folk who have put their line on the line. But then there were also some who were saying to Martin Luther King, you guys have been, just slow down a little bit.
Mm. Mm.
And in Martin Luther King's Why We Can't Wait, he said, listen, you have protection because even though you may be on our side, when you go out there, folk don't really know that. And they're not going to treat you. Now, of course, as you see what just took place in Minneapolis over here, there are two white folk who got killed because they were standing up for a cause, right? And so, and I know it can't be easy for, and let me use the word so-called white folk, because again, in using these labels, we're embracing the labels that were enforced upon us, right? And it can't be easy for those who want to be a part of a change to know that once you cross that line, for those who are defending the concept of whiteness, you have crossed the line. You have sort of disqualified yourself, right? And if you think about it, my fourth great-grandmother, her name was Sarah James. She was enslaved on the Thetford plantation in Jamaica. She was a mulatto. Her father was a white person. I don't know his name. Nicholas Gross, the one through whom I'm tied
Australia.
to King Charles, right?
Oh, yes, the King Charles connection.
To my cousin Charles, but Nicholas Gross, he had a plantation in Clarendon. That's a parish that was next to the parish where my great grandmother was enslaved. So he, of course, is my great grandfather, right? So he comes over, has 3 children with her. Those children are all born on that plantation. They are quadroons at that point, right? Okay, and quadroons, they're more white than black, but they're still enslaved. They're still enslaved. What's interesting, she was Sarah James. There was another Sarah on his plantation when he finished having children with my great grandmother. He had several children, well, two children with Sarah Biddif on his plantation, and those are the ones. And she was also either mulatto or a quadroon. I think she was probably a quadroon because it's her octroon children that came to Australia, so they would have been able to pass for white, right? And so they're the ones who came here. And now, if you do their DNA well, not now if you do, because some of them were connected. That's how I met many of them through ancestry and stuff. they may still have like 2%,
Yeah.
African DNA, even though you would never know it just by looking at them, right?
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah.
yeah, just the complexity. But here's what's interesting. So Sarah Biddulph, two enslaved people who he had children with. Slavery was abolished in the British Empire, 1833. He gets married. Who does he marry? A lady from Scotland.
Right.
So none of the enslaved people, but a lady from Scotland. Then he actually went back to Scotland and ended back up in Devon. It's from Devon, etc.
Mm.
Now this is an aside over here. So Sarah Biddulph, the lady he married was also called Sarah. So I think he had this thing for Sarah's. So I think he probably had a tattoo that says "I love Sarah" or something. Yeah, but again, even with that, Peter, I'm saying, so he has all these children, right? Why couldn't he have married one
Yeah.
of those who get impregnated? Why did he have to choose a white lady from Scotland?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think it's this whole type thing of, am I? Yeah.
Yeah, I get you. And that is the trickle down pressure that may begin at the top with white supremacy that influences white people that may or may not be good people, may or may not want to fight alongside other humans of different colors of skin for a good cause. That can still influence their choices. Nathan Brown writes, no, you have privilege. He's talking to me. I thought I was saying that, yeah, I do have privilege, but maybe I didn't word it clear enough. Thanks, Nathan, for highlighting that. And he also adds, white privilege is not something to feel guilty about, but to recognize and to seek for all. And I thought that was what I was trying to say.
Exactly, exactly, Peter. And that's hitting the nail on the head. If you're feeling guilty about it, then you got to ask the question, am I finding a way to exploit this privilege? But it's just recognizing that it is a matter of fact. It is happening. It is a part of our society. But does it have to define how I treat others, how I interact with others, how I make decisions? It doesn't have to define all that.
And I think that's what I was trying to say. If the people at the table, some of them were still acting from a white supremacy notion of maintaining power, but other white people at the table were realizing they had privilege, but wanted to recognize and seek for all a better community. That's what I've been saying, Nathan. Maybe you just joined the program and didn't get the full gist of what I was saying. And I can imagine that story you told of when you were 7 or 8, that would have shaken you to your core. That behavior is absolutely disgusting that person used on you with their words, with their actions, carrying you down the stairs, influencing their children to also call you those harmful names. That has to be acknowledged, the pain as well. And we can all share our pain stories, but that's a whole extra level of pain. That's saying to you that your very being, just you, is somehow disgusting to just be you. And I think as people at the table recognize their privilege, seek benefit for all, take on board what you're saying, learn from it. I'm just hoping that a certain kind of resentment doesn't grow or continue. I'm just hoping that at some point people can stop polarizing. I fear in my observation of all of this, a backlash in this war that you mentioned, where ignorant people of all skin colors will perpetuate hatred based solely on skin color without understanding that I think ultimately, and I don't know how you grew from that experience and not hate any white person. Like there'd be a tendency for a lot of people, and I'm pretty sure that that story that you shared isn't isolated. I'm sure there's countless
Yeah,
people.
yeah. That's my number. And of course, that wasn't my only white friend. I grew up in England,
No,
yeah.
no, no,
And
no,
so,
no.
so it wasn't. I knew it wasn't sometimes an experience, from every single white person.
No,
My
no,
best
no,
friend
no, no.
in high school. In fact, my high school crew was Steve Happle, white guy. I'm Shah Braza, Pakistani.
Yeah.
A fellow Jamaican, etc.
Yeah. And
that was
they're
our crew.
examples of healthy relationships that we
Right,
all want
yeah.
to steer towards. I guess what I'm talking
Right.
about is how do we ensure that the resentment of our experiences doesn't just keep flip-flopping and backlashing, and I feel that you're probably someone to ask that question. What does it look like when people can just get sounds naive, doesn't it? Hey, we just want to get along. But how do we make it so that systemically it the sabers aren't out brandishing, and that we can move forward and at least incrementally provide a better world for our kids? How do we do that? And what does it look like if it's happening?
Yeah, I think it's kind of hard to change systems. And so as much as I have some optimism, I am extremely pessimistic. And let me explain. All right. I do believe that ultimate change comes when the kingdom of our world becomes the kingdom of our Lord and his Messiah. I think that's when ultimate change comes. But then I remember that old Adventist song, "It only takes a spark to get a fire going." And
Yes.
so my territory is my sphere of influence. And if there are others who are working on their spheres of influence, then hopefully those bubbles will begin to connect with each other.
Yes.
But I can only do what I can do.
Yeah.
You know, you can only do what you can do. We
Yeah.
can all do what you can do. But I do think it's important to recognize and then also understand. So I'm not sure if I put the book up there, but a friend of mine. No, it's not. I had to move my head. Is it up there? It's not there. But anyway, because I positioned a couple books back there for
Yes.
a second.
Yeah.
But a friend of mine, Dr. Jerome Crichton, just finished a book, "Spitting in the Wind," where he deals what he calls white pathology, and looking at the way in which different people groups have been victimized through colonialism, the whole field of eugenics, et cetera, et cetera. And he looks at it as, and he's a psychologist, so he's looking at it as something that appears to be almost socialist, sociopathic in a sense,
Right.
right? And calling folks to recognize. And so it's recognizing that many people who may feel this way may not understand why. And I'm thinking about there's another book, Arlie Russell Hoskell teaches at University of California, Berkeley, "Strangers in Their Own Land: Anger and Mourning in the American Right." I'm not sure if you're familiar with that book. There,
No,
about
it
10,
sounds like a
written
good title.
about 10 years ago. And she's
Mm.
basically looking, she does some field research in Louisiana and is questioning why all these poor folk keep voting against their own interests. And their whole
Mm.
thing is, we're white and we don't like the fact that people are getting ahead of us, so they're poor, but in their mind, they're being told as they listen to, well, Rush Limbaugh is no longer with us, but some of these
Yeah.
shock jocks and others that
Yeah.
they're getting your spot, they're taking your money, they're taking your
Yeah.
jobs. And by the way, just give me $25 for a new T-shirt, and don't realize
Yeah.
that they're being used, that they are being used. And I personally, when I look at the assassination of Martin Luther King, if you look at Martin Luther King's rhetoric, particularly towards the end, more radical rhetoric, but it was always about the way in which the system is working against poor people. Poor people. So yes, he was fighting for the rights of blacks, but he is also fighting for the rights of poor people. And when more people, that final march that they were going to go on in Memphis, Tennessee, there were whites, trade unions, everything that were going to be a part of that. And that gets a little bit dangerous now.
That's what I'm kind of talking about. This kind of almost a groundswell is growing as a backlash.
Right.
I've even heard terms like black fatigue starting to be used, and I'm like, well, here we go. And I fear, like you, that idea of keeping your influence in your sphere of influence and hoping the bubbles and spheres somehow connect. But you also mentioned the pessimism there. In many ways, the pessimism is born out of observable empirical data of history and how it just keeps repeating itself.
Right.
Yeah.
And again, one of my heroes is Malcolm X, right?
Yeah.
And Malcolm X was known to say when he was accused of being prejudiced, he said, "How can you call me prejudiced? I'm making my judgment based upon, decades and centuries of experience. I'm not prejudging, I am judging, right?" But then if you look at Malcolm X, particularly his post-Mecca experience, after he did the Hajj. And this is the Malcolm X that folk don't like to talk about. And it's the Malcolm X who basically said, all people, when he realized that, what he had been told by Elijah Muhammad wasn't exactly what Islam was all about. He says, all people are welcome to join me in this fight for liberation of all folk who are being oppressed by the system, and when I look at that again, just the recognition, where is the pain? Where are those who are being ostracized and maligned? And for me, it really is a Jesus thing.
Right.
Because ultimately, when I look at the gospel, and this is who I am, I teach a class now called Jesus in Contemporary Society. And it's a class at our university. It's an Adventist university, but probably less than 20% of the students are Adventists, right? It's a health science university. We have Buddhists, Muslims, atheists, agnostics, etc. And I teach Jesus as Jesus. It's not a Bible study. It's not a theological. No, we look at the teachings of Jesus and we see how it applies to life, because ultimately, when it comes to what Jesus wants, we can begin with the end in mind, as Steve Covey says. Look at Matthew chapter 25. And that's the kind of society I'm trying to build, the kind of community I'm trying to build. One where I'm not stepping over that homeless person. One where I'm not seeing a person being kicked out just because of their color of their skin, or being picked on because of their sexual orientation or something like that. That's not the Jesus society that I'm looking for.
No, and ultimately, sorry to interrupt. Go. No, you keep going.
And then as it relates to the theme for this evening, I'm not looking for a society either where one person says, if you want to be a part of this organization, then you have to forget your culture.
Yes,
that is not a society.
That's right. And that's why I think it's possible to make a stand, to not forget your culture, and to speak up and clear the temple, as Jesus gave us the example of doing, while also feeding the poor, sheltering the homeless, creating a more Christ-inspired kingdom on earth at the same time. That's why I believe that these conversations are very important. And I don't believe that we go away and that's all we talk about and think about. We, I'm sure, go away, and I'm sure that you, as a pastor, offer pastoral care to your flock, whatever flock that is, whether it's an official church group or people around you. It annoys me when people say, "Oh, you're spending all your time talking about this," or "You're just disgruntled." No, it is possible to actually ponder several things at the same time. And this is just an occasion to do that. We're pondering a very serious topic. We're hoping for, though, a Christ-like outcome. We seek to follow the teachings of Jesus, to make him the focus. And we have the ability to do both of those things simultaneously.
Yeah, and I think this is important, Peter, because I saw some of the comments coming up, and people saying, "What about what Ellen White said about amalgamation?" And when we get there, what that is. And this is, I mean, for everyone to hear right now, Ellen White is not my guide when it comes to race relations. I do like the fact that she spoke about, Adventists disobeying the Fugitive Slave Act or something, but there were some things that she said, particularly on the issue of race, that in many ways were racist. And so, I mean, it's just, and that's how it is. And the church needs to face up to that.
Yeah.
They need to face up to it, and they can't, because I've seen things like, well, she really meant this. No, she didn't. And just because she said things that were racist doesn't mean that she was being deliberately certain thing. That's how folk thought then, and she probably never thought that she was doing anything that like that. But we can't hide things, and I'm not that guy. I'm not that guy. If I see it, I'm going to call it out.
Yeah. And I think, for me, my journey to leaving Adventism began when I read that amalgamation of man and beast statement. It later on grew and became theological, and then the final tipping point was the women's no vote, where people were not allowed to choose for their separate cultures around the world in unions. That was it for me, as I'm holding my little daughter in my arms. Back then it was what, she was maybe 3 or something at Antonio, and I thought, I can't put my name to that anymore. But the seed had already been planted, because for someone to claim to be a messenger of God, and for others to say, well, she's flawed and human and made mistakes, I get that. If I find out C.S. Lewis has got some, I'm not saying he did, but if he did some, I won't say anything. But if he did had wrong behavior, I'm not saying at all that I would then not see his work as inspiring. So I don't look at Ellen White and think, I see a lot of her stuff as inspiring. But I believe someone that claims to be a messenger of God, receiving messages and having divine communication with God, is not going to make such a blunder as calling out amalgamation of man and beast. She was 100% meaning amalgamation of man and beast. There's lots of ways to semantically defend her on that. No. There's plenty of material surrounding that time period where others called out the Hottentot Indians, and she never spoke against it. This is me personally. I'm totally fine with people looking at all the data and remaining an Adventist. I'm fine with that. People say I'm trying to tell people what to do. No, but just for me, that amalgamation of man and beast was the seed. How did it not become the seed of discontent for you to leave?
Great. I'm glad I waited for you to ask a question rather than butt in. Right? I'm glad I waited for you to ask a question. And here's why. I don't subscribe to a post-1919 version of Adventism. It's the 1919 Adventism that elevated Ellen White to a status where they interpret her inspiration at a level that we don't even see anyone in the Bible expressing. Okay, when Paul wrote a letter to the Thessalonians, he wrote a letter to the Thessalonians. When he wrote a letter to the Corinthians. It's only later that these books now begin to sort of get a status sort of thing, right? And so fortunately, in my home growing up, my Adventism, and I think the first time we had a discussion, which was my Adventism, my experience of Adventism has not been the same as so many I know who are no longer Adventists. I've never, in my home, we had all the red books in our home, but we were never told we had to read them.
No.
you know? And so
Yeah.
I never had this elevated understanding of Ellen White.
Yeah.
But I never have, and I don't now.
No. John
I
Rosier, who is a
I
guest
don't know.
regularly on the show,
But
he
yeah,
also, and he's from the UK. He's a
yeah.
great, great gospel man, and
Mhm.
he's still an Adventist, and he's in his 70s.
Yeah,
But he says the
yeah.
same. In the UK,
Right,
you guys didn't get that.
right. And so for me now, stuff like that, I'm like, she's wrong. She's wrong. And that's okay with me. So there are some things that she writes that I find very inspiring, etc. But I don't see her words as the words of God. You know,
Yeah.
I don't believe that the Apocrypha is the hidden book of God for this generation. You know, and that's me. And I'm an ordained Seventh-day Adventist pastor. You
Mm.
know, I teach in the thing, you know, but I understand. I always tell people I'm a historic Adventist.
Yeah.
Historic in the sense I'm that type of Adventist when in the old Advent Review and Sabbath Herald, you have James White write his view on that, and then right next to it, the completely opposite view by you, Rice. That's the kind of Adventist that I am. The
Mm.
ad the Adventist who when 1861, those who joined the church, they basically signed the covenant. We the undersigned covenant to keep the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus. Okay.
Mm.
1872, first 22 propositions. This is not to secure uniformity. To me, that is Adventism. Now, I do know post 1919 Adventism
Mm.
is the dominant brand. I understand that. But that's the reason, getting back to your question, that's the reason why I could see what she says about amalgamation. I can see what she says in, forget which, it's actually in the Southern work of all books.
Mm.
She
Mm.
says black folk need to spend more time with white folks so they can give up some of their, you know, superstitions and stuff like that. You know, I take those things with a grain of salt
Right.
because Ellen White is not my authority when it
Right.
comes to the way in which I understand how to practice faith and everything else like this. So I can find, you know, yeah, wisdom in a lot of things, but she is not. She does not interpret the Bible for me. You
Mm.
know, I teach Greek, etc.
Yeah.
I could, you know, I can see where in her writings, you know, she may be following what the basic trend is, and I could see in the Greek what the Greek actually says, what the Hebrew actually says. And so again, from that perspective, I am not that Adventist.
Right.
I am not the one who was bought into the 1919 fundamentalism
Yeah.
and feel a need to defend what she says. If I see what she says and it's straight up bigoted, I'm going to call it.
Mm. Um, and the progressive Adventists, the Big Tent Adventists, those who enjoyed the assurance of salvation that Des Ford preached, they would agree with you. I used to be one of those Adventists as well. I saw her in that kind of
Mm,
perspective.
mm,
Um, what and the tipping point for me leaving was the no vote. But as I then studied more theologically, the resolution and gratitude of having left
mm,
was cemented not by understanding her in context, but
mhm,
by realizing that her claims that God told her certain
mhm,
things
mhm,
that turned out to be inaccurate
mhm, mhm,
put, in my mind, her in a position of being a false prophet. Ellen,
mhm,
like Darren Pratt just writes on Facebook, just as Peter has grown in the past 5 years, she grew across her lifetime too. And thank you for pointing out that, Darren. But she never renounced the great controversy teachings of her book. And the thing with Adventism that she said God told her was true is nothing to do with amalgamation, nothing to do her with making mistakes and false predictions. It's her claim that there is going to be a time coming when probation closes. Not only a claim, but this, she said, is the reason for Adventism's existence. This teaching was shown to me by God. This sanctuary investigative judgment teaching is the reason we are a remnant people being risen to vindicate God at the end of time by proving Satan's claim wrong that you can't keep the commandments without an intercessor. Satan had allegedly said prior to the fall that unless Jesus is there holding their hand, humans will sin. I'm not going into the semantics of what sin means or anything like that, but there are elements to that specific teaching that is a special message, a plan of salvation even for a certain people just prior to the imminent return of Christ, that she says God told her was true. None of those claims are biblical. We are not on this earth. We're not on this earth to vindicate God. That's not biblical. The seal of the Holy Spirit is not, the seal of God is not the Sabbath. It is clearly the Holy Spirit. We will never stand without an intercessor. Now, no matter which way Adventist apologists slice it, this special message, and Darren talks about, I've changed and Ellen White's changed and we all need to learn and unlearn and all that stuff. I agree. Darren's my neighbor. He's literally, I could throw a plate out the window and it'd hit his house. We're friends. This is an example of friends disagreeing. All of the other stuff I can forgive and put in context, but that unbiblical teaching that she said God confirmed was true, that's when I went, oh, right, I'm glad I left the Adventist church. And I don't judge people for working ways around it and putting square pegs in round holes or living with cognitive dissonance or going, well, I'm going to be more of a cultural Adventist. I'm totally fine with that. 100%. I'm not telling people how to live. I'm outlining what reasons I left. I don't then go, oh, well, you stayed. What's wrong with you? I don't do that. People think I'm doing that. I'm not doing that. In fact, I respect people who use their own grey matter and draw their own conclusions, having examined the data. I respect that.
And Peter, I'm looking at some of the comments coming over here, and
I'm not even looking at them today for some reason.
Folk obviously don't know me, and they get used to me because one thing. I'm not an apologist in any way for anything Adventist of Ellen White Christianity. That's not me.
Oh, that's coming across clearly.
That is not me. That is not me at all. And so I think some of the comments I'm reading over here.
We'll bring across a few in a moment because they kind of dovetail. There's something I think that happened within the Black church within Adventism that I think is a really wonderful thing. And it is the creation of these conference unions. Can you tell us a little bit about how they came into being? And I wish the new theology, Larry Geraghty's Progressive Adventists, the guys that wrote this book, to reclaim the prophet, which I hold up all the time.
Is that an actual copy?
That's an actual copy.
Have they started
sent to me? No. So it's still cancelled and banned and blocked. These people of privilege have been castigated and cancelled. But these guys are great guys. Ron Grable, George Knight. A lot of them, 90% of them I've interviewed on the show. And as soon as they speak up their beautiful version of gospel Adventism and progressive Adventism, they're shut down. That's my point. In Adventism, if you're employed, if you're anything but a cultural Adventist, if you're promoting new theology, you're not going to last very long in employment, put it that way. You're in a separate situation because you are part of this unique conference union kind of thing. I think you could speak freely and not lose your job. Some people have said that in the comments because of the way you're benefiting from a certain structural system within Adventism that protects you. And I wish the progressive Adventists also could set up their own conferences so they could really breathe life into their unique theology.
Yeah, not necessarily, Peter. I mean, I just speak how I speak, and I've paid the price before.
Yeah, okay.
I have paid.
You might lose your job then after today's interview.
No, I have paid, but no, I don't see it as losing a job actually, because everything I do is really anchored in scripture, right? And I'm honest. I've always been honest about who I am. Okay, I'm not an apologist. And I was mentioning some of the comments, folks saying, "Does he preach the investigative?" Again, that strikes to the heart of our theme today: the white lie, Eurocentric, hegemony in the global Adventist church. That's what white folk want me to teach. That's how white folk want to behave. And so a lot of the questions coming in, the challenges and the question, he might lose his job and stuff. I think that's because we're trained to see things through white lens. And what I believe is that the time has come for other voices to be at the table so that we can rethink, we can reimagine who we are as Adventists, or who we should be as those of us who are Adventists, right?
Yeah.
Now, as it relates to the question you asked about what we call the regional conferences. Yeah, so the history of the regional conferences, if you look at the Black work in the United States of America, didn't start with any intentionality until the late 1800s. And this was Ellen White's son.
So it goes way back.
Yes. And so Ellen White's son, Edson White, and a colleague of his, forgetting his name right now, will come to me. But anyway, they basically went to the GC, said, want to start a mission to Black America. GC says, we have no money. And so they chartered a ship on their own dime, the Morning Star, went down to Vicksburg, Mississippi. And that's kind of not say the genesis, but one of the points at which the Black work starts down south, right? So, of course, we begin to have Blacks joining the Seventh-day Adventist Church, kind of trickling in. The reason why they're trickling in, because they were kind of late to the game. We already had the African Methodist Episcopal Church, started in 1798, African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church, 1812, and a number of other uniquely Black-based denominations. So with the Adventist Church, the mission to Black America started pretty late. And we find that not too many were joining in the South. In the North, interestingly, it started growing around the same time as the Garveyite movement, the United Negro Improvement Association. And one of the converts to Adventism was a former Baptist pastor called James K. Humphrey. James K. Humphrey, and there's an interesting book that's back there somewhere, James K. Humphrey and the Sabbatarian Adventists, and the reason why, the Sabbath-day Adventists. So the reason why we have that name, very quickly, James K. Humphrey became an Adventist, started what is now the Ephesus Church in New York, started about 4 or 5 other churches, but then began to ask questions. This is in the 1920s. He said, listen, we're Adventists. There's an Adventist school up there in Massachusetts. That's the Atlantic Union College. There's an Adventist school close to General Conference in Maryland. There's an Adventist school in Tennessee. Why is it that if we want to be educated, that we have to go to Huntsville, Alabama? Because Blacks were not allowed to go to Adventist schools on the East Coast unless it was Oakwood University, right? Or Oakwood College back then, or Oakwood Industrial School.
Yes.
So he decided that he was going to buy some land upstate New York. It's called the Utopia Park Project. He was going to build his own school, build a sanitarium, because Blacks weren't allowed in sanitariums, Adventist sanitariums, and he was going to do all this, and they disfellowshipped his entire congregation.
Wow.
Right. And that's when the Sabbath-day Adventist denomination started. There's only one church left now. In its heyday, they had probably about 20 churches.
Yes.
But there's only one church left now, right?
And he started, right.
So this is taking place. In another area, in the DC area, we have a guy called Louis Sheaf. And I'm not sure if you've had Doug Morgan on this show before, but Doug Morgan, of course, he wrote Adventism in the American Republic. But one of his more recent books is Louis Sheaf, Apostle to Black America, when Louis Sheaf was the pastor of the People's Church. And Louis Sheaf, he basically was, he very strong preacher, came in from the Methodists, etc. And he wanted a church where everyone was welcome.
Yeah.
But the conference said you can't do that. It has to be a black church. So he left for a while, and Ellen White actually lobbied for him to come back, and he came back for a minute, but then after a while, and so the church that he actually founded, Kellogg and others were a member of that church.
Right.
And again, so we're going now 20s, late 30s,
Yeah.
right? There's still this division in the church.
Yeah.
So what is said by some to be the straw that broke the camel's back? There was a lady who was classified as African American because, of course, she was mixed, very light skinned, probably had more European genes in her than she did African genes, but one drop makes you black, right? And so she was admitted to the Adventist hospital in DC. They found
Oh,
out she was black,
yes.
and they said, can't treat you.
Oh, yes.
And so she was sent to the People's Hospital, so the Freedmen's Hospital across state lines, which was run by the Methodists, I think, and she died.
She died.
And
Yes.
around that time, several black leaders got together, started the National Association for the Advancement of Colored Seventh-day Adventists.
Right.
Wow. That's fashioned
Yes.
after the NAACP, right? And so we have this, and they were advocating for equity. So GC president at the time, J.L. McKinley, he calls the black leaders to get together and say, okay, what can we do? And so they discuss it. So the general conference voted in 1944 that in Union territories where there was a sufficient black constituency, the blacks, they called them coloreds back then, coloreds can vote to have their own conferences, and the conferences covered the whole union. That's how they started. It wasn't that it wasn't like blacks were saying, we want our conferences. The GC says, go ahead and start them.
Yeah.
Right? And so that was the genesis of what we call they're not called black conferences, they're called regional conferences in the United States of America. And what happened though is after the formation of the conferences, because they were black administered, etc., the numbers started growing. Okay, so they were more effective when it came to evangelism, building structures, building systems, etc.
Right.
And so it's gotten to a point now, because I know there are a lot of people who are saying, well, do we still need the system? The truth is we still do, because there's a lot that's taking place that just isn't right. And oftentimes when there's talk about doing away with conferences, etc., it's always about, okay, why don't you shut down the regional conferences and merge with the other conferences?
Yeah.
And the situation in the United States. And again, the initial thing that got me talking about this and why I'm on the show right now is Ryan Day's type thing about whiteness, right?
Yeah,
because
I know what you're going to say.
Here is the reality. In New York, okay, there aren't that many white Adventists. Because whether it's the regional conference, that's the Northeastern Conference, or the Greater New York Conference, it's a mostly minority.
Yeah.
I think so even the white conferences in certain places are majority black now. It's
so you can see why. Hey, let's merge our conferences because they want their numbers to look better. I think that, and I do remember that story of that lady not being allowed access to that hospital and having to be moved on an Adventist hospital. I was ashamed at the time to be an Adventist when I read that, but that was the catalyst. I did not know that, for these regional conferences.
Yes.
And not that it's as a darker moment as that. This book may be the catalyst. Progressive gospel Adventists, I'm talking to you. This is your time to start your own regional conferences. And the reason I say that is because I was a progressive Adventist, and I saw this kind of top-down leadership constantly destroying the mental health of creatives, gospel-focused people. Things were being shut down all the time. We weren't allowed to speak up. We'd lose jobs. We'd have power plugs pulled out of PA systems. This constant top-down control of our identity as progressive gospel Adventists destroyed our culture. And why I'm upset with the progressive gospel Adventists is I don't think they are doing enough in a public sense of galvanizing and bringing together people of like minds to ensure that what happened to my generation doesn't continue happening. The Adventist Church outside of your regional conferences and in the Western part of the world is losing young people to huge percentages. The loss is incredible. And so I cajole, I'm not attacking, I'm challenging. I'm suggesting progressive Adventists who are watching this and feel that I'm trying to attack their identity. I'm not. I'm encouraging you to, and I, for the first time ever, thank you to you, Keith. People have said, well, what do you suggest then? I've never really known what to suggest, and I've thought different ideas. Now I feel like I've got something to suggest. Try and set up your own regional conferences. Stay Seventh-day Adventist, but be bold in presenting your special, unique identity, your message, your version of Adventism, which I loved, to be honest. You know, sorry for the little aside there, but I'm inspired by this conversation in hoping that people can look into their sphere of influence and make a difference. You know, a lot of these guys say, oh, well, you know, just don't speak up too loudly. We'll change things. There's a boldness to what you do that I really respect and wish the progressive Adventists that I am speaking about had within their genes. You coming on the show, yeah, of course. You just said, yeah, let's come on, let's talk about it. I cannot get employed liberal progressive Adventists on the program anymore because they fear losing their jobs. And I'm like, guys, you're losing young people hand over fist. You're all retiring. You're all dying off. You're going to drop off the perch soon. You're going to soon have no influence, and you're squandering your legacy. They're my thoughts.
Yeah. It's kind of getting late, Peter. I'm not sure how long we normally go for.
I can see during my little speech there, I can see you starting to drift off.
It's 11:15. Oh my goodness, way past my bedtime. But listen. Yeah. So for me, what does the song say? My hope is built on nothing less than Jesus' blood and righteousness. You know, I dare not trust the Spirit speaking about holy in Jesus' name. For me, it really is about the gospel, you know, and I think if this church, if any church is going to survive, then we really have to think about what it's all about. And when I talk about the gospel, I teach a church history class, and the final module is rescuing Jesus from Christianity.
That is so weird. I've started writing a book called Rescuing Jesus, and I've got a slightly longer subtitle.
Rescuing Jesus from Christianity, because I think, you know, much of what we do is philosophical. And philosophy, okay, you know, doctrine is philosophy, you know, is it? And philosophy is basically going to what's more probable than what's actual, you know? But there is no question about how Jesus has called us to treat the least of these, the kind of society that he wants us to be. And so for me, if we're going to see a future for the Jesus movement, it's going to have to move away from philosophy to societal transformation. It has to do that. I was at a meeting. Yeah, I was at a meeting in England a couple of years ago. It was an ADRA meeting, you know, and one of the pastors there was lamenting how their children no longer attends church. And they wanted to say, but if Andrew's doing anything, they're right there,
They're
you know.
they're doing
And
church.
yeah, and so I said to this pastor, I said, you say your children left the church, but is it possible that what you see Andrew doing is where the church really is?
Yeah.
You know? And I think that if there's going to be any hope, if there's going to be any hope for a genuine community, then a lot of these ideological wars that continue to fragment and divide would have to, you know. So for me, I'm a theologian. I like a debate just like the next person.
Yeah.
But to me, that's as Paul says, that's scubalon.
Yeah.
And I'll just use the cleaned up version of that word, the King James. The King James says dung, but that's actually a pretty harsh word. You know?
Yeah. It's accurate. Yeah. Hey, well, look, it's time for your bedtime, and we do typically go for 2 to 2.5 hours. So we've definitely hit that number again tonight. But this has been a really valuable conversation. I seriously mean that from my heart. I will watch this again. I will learn from it, and I thank you for being on the program. And I feel like that you're in a place and have people around you that support and keep you feeling like you belong. And I guess my feeling within Adventism, and I left when I was 54, is that I never felt like I belonged. I always felt like I had muso friends and we all felt on the fringe. So we all kind of belonged in our fringeness. But I look in from the outside now, and I speak in a way that if people, these progressives I speak of, do form some kind of regional conference, it's never going to benefit me. I'm not speaking to benefit me in this. I'm pleased where I have come in my small community. And I used to do 3 shows a week that were this kind of conversation. I've dedicated one of those shows now just to the gospel. Every Thursday night, 5:30 p.m. your time or California time. Every Friday lunchtime, Aussie time, we gather together with a special guest and focus only on the gospel. So that's where my sales funnel goes, I guess, that ultimately at the end of the week, after a robust time of conversation, we settle in, small group of us, come online here, and we enjoy just the gospel unfiltered.
Okay, Pastor.
I don't present. I'm never the guest presenter. I think I was once.
But
once.
you are the pastor, though. Don't run away from that. You're the pastor of this church.
I'm the gatekeeper. I make sure that we keep some of the wolves out. I'm maintaining the structure of the fence, and I invite pastors to come in. I think I do offer pastoral care, but can I ask one last question?
Yes, sir.
Because not really, I don't really care, but a lot of people in the comments, and I tell you what, boy, I got some really good questions behind the scenes that I wish we had time for, that were really intelligent questions. But maybe we can have another conversation in a couple of months' time. Like, just for example, here's one, and they wanted to remain anonymous. They sent them to me privately. With more than 90% of the Adventist membership now living outside North America and Europe, isn't the hegemony argument becoming outdated as the sheer demographics of the global South are naturally changing the culture of the church from the bottom up? I thought,
I say no, because the power of hegemony is that you get the mind, and once you get the mind, it doesn't matter what color skin it is.
yeah,
If the mind.
but a good question. And there's about 10 of them that have popped up. So those who've sent them, I'll invite Dr. Burton back in a couple of months.
Okay.
and he can answer those. But if the final question, if you did feel that there was absolute proof and evidence to suggest that Ellen White was a false prophet, would that make you leave the church, or would you be like other pastors that have been on the show that have said, you know, no, the culture of Adventism is strong enough for me that it's a providential movement. I would stay because of my cultural connection and identity with it. I have meaning and a sense of belonging. To a lot of people, whether the Ellen White was a false prophet or not, they wouldn't leave. What are your thoughts? If you found out uncategorically that she was a false prophet, would you leave the Adventist church?
Yeah, as I mentioned before, Peter, she's not the reason why I'm an Adventist in the first place, and so
Yeah.
to me, that's really a non-question in a sense,
Right.
because I have not embraced that version of Adventism.
That's what I thought. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, we've been listening to Dr. Burton, everybody. Shoot up some likes there. And Dr. Keith Burton, thank you so much for being on the program today. It's been a pleasure. Someone made a joke and said that I should have told you to bring a cut lunch. I actually did. So I'll go and finish it.
I probably could have come to Australia to get some good old English fish and chips. Eh?
Until next time, thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure.
Take care, likewise. Peace.